And welcome back to Standard Live. It's time for an interview with the Deputy Chief of Staff in the Office of the President, Njoka Waita. Welcome to the program. This is like a rare moment. I know you don't do TV interviews, yet you've had this sort of astronomical rise since you were appointed by the President into government to now your current position. Relatively little is known about you other than the fact that you come from the corporate world. That's your background at Safaricom. What more can you tell us about yourself?
We're sort of the behind the scenes people, so it's intended to be that way.
Okay.
No, I've been in government now about a year and 10 months, but I also worked for a relatively large organization before, so I'm just sort of feeling that it's my previous lifetimes 1,000.
Okay.
In terms of size and complexity.
What would you say the challenges are and the differences between corporate and how government runs?
In corporate you can see where your things start and end. In government is a big machine.
Okay.
And to understand the far reaches and corners of government takes a while. I don't think any one person in government can tell you that they can see all four corners of the length and breadth of government. So that has been a lesson for me. Government is not so much about substance, about form. So there's procedures, there's ways in which things are done, and you must understand them. Red tape, it's a necessary process in order to ensure accountability across such a large organization. Yeah.
What would you say working, because you work directly under three individuals, the President, his deputy, and of course your immediate boss would be the head of the civil service. Yes. What would you say it's like working for the President? What kind of boss is he?
He's a sort of person who will call you and ask you a question, but chances are he knows the answer. So you need to think before you answer the question, and if you have to answer the question, you sort of need to anticipate what the next instruction will be. It's different in many ways because the questions could be far-ranging, and the challenges that he faces when he seeks out his advisors, you could really be a left field question could come. So you have to have the disposition to sort of be able to understand what he would like done, and also to know who you need to consult in order to get his instructions carried out. Wow.
Okay. That sounds a little political.
Well, in a typical 9 to 5 in a corporate organization, you have your job description, you have the parameters of what you do, what you don't do, you have the things that you're measured on. So in one regard, you sort of have very finite parameters to work with. With government, it's slightly different, and with the back office, because we take instructions from His Excellency the President, but we also facilitate for his team, because the President works through his generals who are his commanders, the cabinet secretaries, the principal secretaries, and the other liaisons with the other arms of government, and those of us in the presidency do the back office coordination for that, in order to help him to be able to do his constitutional duties. And
so there are a lot of people to manage in your day-to-day work, I suppose?
To assist, not really to manage, because we are sort of a facilitative function as opposed to a command and control function, because we are the President's staff. If you look at cabinet secretaries, for instance, those are constitutional offices that are spelled out in the Constitution. They have very defined mandates, and they take an oath before Parliament. They carry a heavy burden, and our work is to help them with a helicopter view to ensure proper coordination between different ministries, and to also just ensure that the best decision support is given to the President and to his cabinet.
All right. Let's now talk about the civil service proper. And I mean, this is a giant organization, a giant animal, which unfortunately in Kenya's history is known specifically for three things: corruption, tribalism, and being a non-performing entity. And I want to tackle each one. I want to start with corruption, and one of the biggest issues that this administration unveiled was the question of ghost workers. Where are we in terms of ridding the civil service completely of ghost workers?
The process really is not so much about getting rid of people. The big challenge that the public service faces is one of productivity. And
this is ghost workers I'm talking about specifically, so they're not even there.
We've gone through a fairly rigorous process with the Public Service Commission. We've gone through head counts, department by department, and those people who are no longer employees of government or were never employees of government do not appear on the payroll anymore. So in that regard, it's really more of a non-issue now. The biggest challenge we face in the public service today is to be able to provide them and facilitate them to be more productive, and to give them the tools and the resources in which to really complement the aspirations of the government of the day.
That I suppose would also be talking about the expectation that in reducing the size of the civil service for efficiency there would be an inevitable job cut. But when you're talking about productivity, what specifically are you doing to make sure that everyone who is there right now actually understands what is expected of them?
To your earlier point, I've come from an environment where a reduction is not always a solution. The issue for us is really, are we properly resourcing our public service? And it's a shared aspiration between the President and the Public Service Commission, who consult quite regularly, that step number one was to reorganize the government in a way that allowed accountability to its farthest reaches, that reduced the span of control for individuals, not so much to curtail power, but to increase accountability and to help span productivity. So I would probably say the couple of things we're doing is investing in training. We've revamped the Kenya School of Government. We're looking very critically at skills mapping. Performance contracting has not been where it ought to be, but in the recent changes within government, we've sort of taken a rethink around performance contracting and understanding that performance contracts need to reflect the aspirations of the administration. So it's not just good to turn up at work, it's are you turning up at work and delivering on the promises that the President has made to the people when he took his oath of office? Are we measuring outcomes as opposed to outputs? Are we looking at delivering on specifics, expectations of the public? Because you have a highly educated populace, you have a highly connected populace, you have people who understand what government ought to give them in terms of services, so they will not cut you any slack for not giving them what they expect. And that's a real pressure, and I think a shock to the system for many of us, when people understand that it's no longer about go and queue in some amorphous office and wait for a result. People know who is accountable, they know who to call, and they demand results. And that's something that we all have to adjust to.
Which actually brings me to an interesting point. There has been the notion that the office of the President is very keen on doing surveys on the popularity of the President and see how electable he is in the next term. Out of those quote-unquote surveys that are being done, what is the priority of the Kenyan people? What are they expecting you to deliver by the time we go to the polls in 2017?
And if there's one thing the President's team is very clear on, is what we need to get done. And it's no different in 2013 than it is now. We understand what we need to do to have social impact. We know what we need to do in education. We know what we need to do in healthcare.
Measurably.
In education, it's very simple. No child should be left behind. President's vision is to make sure that when children finish standard 8, they make it into a school in Form 1. We intend by the next financial year to have free day secondary school, truly free and truly universal. And that's reflected in the budget estimates before the House now. If you look at digital literacy as an example, we've taken a very holistic view to education. It's not so much about having a tablet pretty much like what you have in front of you, but the whole curricula has been adjusted The way in which content is administered on digital platforms has been changed. The way in which we are allowing children at the earliest age to interact with technology is something that no previous government has contemplated, let alone executed upon.
Yeah, and it's been a challenge for you too, right? But let me go back to the point that you made about having free primary education, truly free. Are you saying that you expect that in the next financial year, no parent should have to pay a single coin for their kids to go to school?
When you look at secondary education particularly, if you look at the level of attrition between the time a child sits standard 8 and then the intake that happens in Form 1, we are losing on average upwards of 300,000 children. That is cause for concern, because where do those kids end up? The aspiration of the president is to see that attrition rate drop, at least for free day secondary school, by doing two things. One is providing the capitation for each child, and two is providing the resources to expand the classroom infrastructure. Now, those two-pronged methods will definitely see us reduce the numbers to less than 50,000 in next year's intake.
And fair enough, but when it comes to FPE, free primary education, where we've seen, I mean, just in the last 2 weeks, reports of how head teachers have been mismanaging resources, you know, textbooks, etc. I mean, almost everything. Are you saying that parents can expect, because of this budget issue that you've said, parents can expect that your child will literally just be able to walk into school without the parents having paid for anything, say for perhaps uniform? Is that what you're saying?
That's our vision. And if you look at what the Cabinet Secretary is doing, Dr. Matiang'i, he's made it patently clear that there will be nobody sacrificed who interferes with this project. So if you're a headmaster or a principal somewhere and you're spiriting away resources that are supposed to go to your schools, you will be held accountable.
Do you have a timeline for that?
It's work in progress. As you speak, you can see teachers being held accountable. You can see principals being held accountable. You've seen changes to the procurement model for books going into schools. You have seen an audit being carried out right now to ascertain that capitation is going to the right schools and for the right quota of children.
All right, I want to show some pictures now. If we could roll them, basically what's been happening this weekend, a very deliberate attempt by the president and his deputy. I think we had that shot as well, to seem very ordinary, come down to the level of your everyday Kenyan. Does it go beyond a good photo opportunity? What is the practical delivery from this government that shows that we actually identify with the very grassroots of our society?
If you asked me this question maybe 14 months ago, I'd probably have told you maybe it's a PR op. Now I can confidently tell you the president and his deputy understand very well the needs of Kenyans. They don't live in an ivory tower. If anyone understood how the president works, they will know he consults from the highest to the lowest. He takes counsel from very ordinary people. He goes out of his way to interact with regular folk, and he takes their plight as if it were his own. The burden of leadership is not something that he takes lightly, and he agonizes about the speed at which we are able to actualize what it is we intend for the public.
What's slowing you down?
You have a very ambitious agenda and a machinery that just needs a bit of tweaking to keep up to pace with that agenda. So case in point is you have a new constitutional framework that requires a lot more consultation on budget estimates. There are quite a number of functions that don't necessarily reside with the national government anymore. You know, a case in point is around healthcare, where we would like to be a lot more aggressive and a lot more bullish in what we're doing with healthcare. But this is a shared responsibility with devolved governments, and you know, there's still a bit of push and shove around scope, around accountability, you know, flagship areas around maternal healthcare, issues around managed equipment, where it's only now that some of the county governments are providing much needed infrastructure and support to take in this equipment. But I'll tell you, by and large, out of the 47 county governments, we are working with each governor in slightly different iterations to deliver our version of what we think are much needed interventions in healthcare.
And yet the opposition would say that what is slowing you down is everyone is busy tenderpreneuring, even within the same government, the issue of corruption. How have you been able, where do you think you are in fighting it and in really getting a service that actually serves and is not there to make its own side deals?
Well, tenderpreneuring did not begin and certainly will not end with this administration. And it's the nature of things. So long as there are things to be purchased and things to be sold, that trade will exist. What this government has done that no previous administration has taken account of is to start instituting controls. It is under this administration that far-reaching changes to public procurement legislation have been made, including a code of ethics. It is under this administration that an anti-bribery bill is being supported from the private sector. It is under this administration that chief financial officers and procurement directors have been reshuffled with a view to refreshing what is going on there. And having said that, we still have a record of delivery on the ground. So if you go to the county hospitals, you will see the equipment in the hospitals. You will see it working. You will see patients over there. If you go to schools today, there are children in school. They are being paid for. Their books are getting there. Laboriously in some instances, but it's happening. If you go to the counties, you'll see the roads that are being built, some that we're doing on our own, others that we're doing in collaboration with county governments. If you look at our security services and the investment that has been made to modernize and provide adequate resourcing to our security services, it is there. If you drive today...
Let me hold you on security services.
Yes.
It's one thing to modernize it, but I think what Kenyans are really concerned about in the events of the last 4 weeks is how professional is it. So let me delve into governance issues and what does the presidency think about how the police force handled the last 4 weeks of protests agitating for changes at IEBC? And,
you know, credit to our security services. I think they've been extremely restrained in the face of what can only be seen by an objective commentator as unnecessary provocation. You have situations where our policemen are faced with very complex challenges on the ground that don't necessarily make it onto TV. If you were to interview people who own shops in town and take their perspective, they will give you an entirely different view about what they think about the police. They will say that those policemen have saved their businesses. Those mama bogas who are being chased around town when they should be really enjoying free enterprise will tell you that last week the police did a commendable job to allow them to continue earning a living. The challenge of being a policeman... Why
does the presidency always seem to overlook the right of protesters also to go and air their grievances? The narrative always seems very pro-protect the business. It doesn't seem to be pro-protect the voice of Kenyans, however many they may be, to lobby, to picket, to say we don't agree.
Two things. One is that rights exist contemporaneously, and the government has done its fair duty to allow for picketing and demonstrations. Where we draw the line is really where demonstrations take a violent direction, where people come to demonstrations carrying things other than placards. You know, placards can't hurt people, but stones do, crude weapons do. When people come inebriated into the CBD, you know, there's a fine balance between protecting those rights contemporaneously. My right to picket and demonstrate. Certainly, if I was angry and upset about government, I would not want that right interfered with. But in the same breath, when you choose a commercial working day in the heart of the country's economy,
it's not illegal.
It's not illegal, but we certainly have to stay within the parameters of a demonstration. So picket on the streets by all means, but when you enter into private space, when you enter into offices where your license has not been extended or your demonstration has not been licensed, then the law must take its course, and we must be unambiguous about the application of the law.
There seems to be such deliberation on apply the law, but it seems the presidency does not want to be proactive when it comes to resolving the impasse. Is it the position of the government of Kenya that seeing as this IEBC issue is a governance issue and it will impact perceptions on delivery of this government, that you do need to put some sort of proposal on the table during this window where the opposition has said it's not going to be on the streets?
Nobody will hold a gun to the head of government. That just won't happen. But two things that we must delineate. One is that it's not about IEBC per se. I'll take a slightly more holistic view. We as a country have gone through a process, and a very deliberate process, to create a new constitution that we felt would address both anticipated and historical challenges. There is absolutely no issue within our political and constitutional framework that does not have a resolution mechanism that is built into the constitution. And something else I want to just draw attention to is that the constitution and the electoral process does not belong to politicians. It belongs to Kenyans. The president is under oath to protect the constitution. He has a sacred duty to ensure that any discourse that could potentially undermine his oath to protect this constitution as the custodian on behalf of Kenyans must be dealt with. So I'll propose that the school of thought that there should be a dialogue is welcome, but it is welcome because there is a constitutional framework that provides for how that dialogue will be conducted. Now, to take us out of a constitutional framework is suggesting two things. One is that a constitution that is still fresh from the printing press, still fresh from the blood of people who died in 2007, 2008, that it holds no weight today, and people do not trust that the process is built in useful enough for them, raises even more fundamental questions as to what kind of conversation is this that can be held outside of the constitutional framework.
And so therefore I hear you saying in as far as internal CS Nkaiseri is concerned, you know, saying that on Wednesday this sort of battle royale that seems to be playing out over who will be at Uhuru Park, and whether the opposition has a right to be there, or is it this prayer rally where some Jubilee politicians have intimated that they'll be attending. The structure of government stands firmly behind him. Arrest the opposition if they were to go there?
So I won't say anything about Jubilee because, you know, I cannot comment for the political machinery, but I will say that the government has an obligation, first of all, to due process. I think the issues around who should be where, there must be a logical way in which that can be resolved. There are people who have made applications. Those applications must be treated in the correct manner. If they were legally licensed to be in a particular place, then the law must take its course. I think what we cannot have is anyone being bullied into accepting or being removed from a venue. I think if any party has the correct documentation to be where they ought to be, then by all means they should carry on.
Njoka Waita, the Deputy Chief of Staff in the Office of the President. Thank you so much for coming in front of the camera and not being behind the scenes tonight.
Thank you.
Let's catch up with some more news now. The death